Hello, this is the Tinker and Create class on digital game design. My name is Doug Tepe, and I'm the lead instructor for Tinker and Create. Tonight in our class, we are going to go over how to add some simple game mechanics to the game that we've been designing using Unreal Engine. We will be creating a simple Launchpad to jump over the lava that we created last week, as well as a game over event. So if you touch the lava, game over, you gotta start over again. So, you ready to tinker? Let's go. So looking at the Unreal Launcher, I am going to be clicking on my version that I've been using before, which is version 4.24. And we'll launch that. As usual, you have to wait a moment for it to come up, and then you'll have your choice as to which project you want to open. I've been calling mine My Project. My Project 2 was a dud that I never actually ended up using, but we're using My Project 2, so we'll go ahead and launch it here. Again, a reminder, if you are going off and trying to launch your project directly from the file folders from the Unreal Projects folder, make sure that you only click on it once or do a double click once. Otherwise, you're going to have it load multiple times and it's going to crash your computer. If you launch it directly from Unreal Engine through the Epic Games Launcher, though, it doesn't allow you to do that, so you won't have that problem. So again, when we launch it, it'll drop us off here in the third-person template again. And as I mentioned last week, you can see down in your content browser at the bottom here all the different levels that we've been working on. So I'm going to look for level 1, double click on it, and then this will be what we saw last week. Now in the meantime, I decided to have it go through and calculate out the lighting. So it has a little bit more realistic lighting now. I've got some nice shadows going on where the sunlight comes in. You can even see the shadows going along the side of the staircase here. It creates a very realistic concrete effect here. There's also our launch pad here that we stuck in last week, and of course our lava. So first things first today, I think what I'm going to show you here is how to get it so that way we can always load the level that we were working on most recently every time, instead of having to go from the third-person template to the level that we're working on. So to do that, you need to go to your settings menu that's right up here in the middle above your viewport. Drop this down and select Project Settings. Inside the project settings is a whole lot of things that you can control: how your game is registered, which maps you're using, and so on, what kind of controllers you're going to be using. For our purposes today, all we're just looking for over here is maps and modes. Click on that, and then it'll say what your default maps are. Right now, the default map is set to the third-person example map. So let's make our default map, for now, level 1. And the game default map might as well be level 1 too. So that way, once we actually start our game, it will automatically start in level 1. Now, perhaps eventually we might want to have some kind of a waiting room or a welcome screen or something like that. And that might actually be its own separate map, so that way we'd have the title of the game, perhaps the credits. Credits, of course, are always very important. We want to let everyone know who designed the game. But for now, at least, while we're editing the game, we're going to stick with the editor startup map and set it to the level that I was working on most recently, level 1. So just click the X button in the upper corner here to close that window out. And this way, once we come back in, we don't have to keep on loading level 1 every single time. We can just go straight to level 1. Let's see here. The next thing I was talking about last week was a few more gameplay elements. So right now, we've got lava underneath. We got some holes. We got this big jump here. And then what I was saying is that then the player can be presented with a choice. Either they run along an upper platform to get across the lava field here, or they land on the launch pad, which will bounce them over. So just by way as a quick refresher from last week, we're going to use the geometry brushes again, just to create a new platform over on this side. Now, I was goofing around with this spiral stair brush last week. I think this time I'm actually just going to get rid of it for now until maybe I get some sort of inspiration about that later. So I'm just pressing the delete key on my keyboard to remove that. And then probably the best way to actually have an upper platform would just be to copy the floor that I've already been using. That way, of course, over in my world outliner, over here on the other side, we already have floor and floor 2, which is on the far side. So if I go over here, make sure I'm on the floor, and then I see my arrows here, my green, red, and blue arrows, then I can just press and hold down the Alt key, grab the blue arrow, and pull this up until it becomes almost like a ceiling here. You'll see over here on the world outliner now, it shows up as floor number 3. That's good. So this is a good way to start off because it already has material on it that I want, the concrete style material. And it's roughly about as wide as I want it to be. So I just need to adjust it a little bit more now that I have it up there. So I have this copy of floor 3 up here. Make sure to get your brush settings again. Remember, if you click on a particular brush that you're using, it's only going to pick one side of that brush, being the side that we want to apply some kind of texture on, some kind of material that we've added to it. In this case, I've been using the concrete. So to make sure that we actually grab the whole brush, just click off it and click on again on the world outliner. And looking down here in our brush settings, we can see again the X, Y, and Z sizes. So I'm just going to shrink this down till it's short enough to be a platform. That's a little bit too short perhaps. So let's see here, what's a good number? I want it to be long enough so that way they can get from here across the lava field. So let's keep on making this a little bit wider, a little bit longer, till it's long enough to get across the lava field. That's good. It gets across the lava field, and then I can just double check to make sure here that I've got room to jump onto it from the side. This might actually be one of those situations where we want to make sure we use the perspective view and change the perspective view up here to a left view. So again, when we are viewing it in the left view, it automatically switches into a wireframe, so I can see everything a little bit more clearly, and this gives me a chance to actually align everything properly. So now that I see this here, I can actually make sure that this is moved over just enough so it's like an extra stair on top of the staircase. So I see this is set at 3,400, so to make it almost perfect, I'll set it at 3,400. There we go. Now I can go and take a look at this. Looks good. It's pretty much aligned. It's like an extra step on top, so I'm just going to move this over. Make it a little bit more narrow, so then my Y here is only as wide as the staircase. What was my staircase anyways? The staircase was 321. All right, so going back to floor 3, I'll just make this 321. Okay, so now it should be about the same width as the staircase. It aligns good. Now I've got an extra platform, about the same width as the staircase here. And of course, I don't want people necessarily falling off the wrong side of the world, so I might even want to grab this other wall here and make the wall perhaps a little bit taller. So I'm going to change its Y up until it's tall enough. make sure people don't accidentally fall off on the wrong side. At least not till they get to the top, and then, well, maybe I'll have some fun trying to trick them into falling off. So maybe that's good enough. So that wall is a little bit taller than the other wall. Yeah, good enough for now. Okay, so now we've got this platform going along top. Let's play the game, just give it a quick test, see how that looks. Run down here. Run up to the top. Oh, you know what? I see that I forgot to include the cement style material on the very edge here. I can fix that later. For now, at least, I'm going to run right across here. We're going to see that we can run down this platform. And we got enough room to jump right back in on the other side. Plenty of room. Okay. So that was the other thing I wanted to do, just to offer another chance to get over the lava here. The other thing I wanted to show was other ways of controlling how our material is spread across our brush. So our lava field here is currently called Box Brush 2. I have another one that's called Box Brush 1. Oh, that's my Launchpad. Right. Okay. So Box Brush 2 is my lava field. And so looking over at my world outliner, I'm just going to rename this just to remind myself what it was. So in the right-click menu, when you go to Edit, you can click on Rename, or you can press the F2 button. I'm going to press the F2 button. I'm going to call it Lava Field. All right, that way I can remember where it is. All right, so now that I have Lava Field, this is still a brush, and it has my lava material spread all across it. Right now, though, it is actually repeating the lava so often, it's kind of obviously just copied many times over. So to make it look perhaps a little bit more realistic, what I can do instead is to spread the lava material over it in a wider way. I can magnify how my material is spread over it. So what I'll do is I'm going to go down to my geometry menu here. Now at this point, remember, I'm actually selecting the material, so I'm just going to select the top material here. Go down to where it says geometry, and I'm going to select the matching brush. So it's selected all the materials on all sides. They're still using lava on every single side, so as you can see, it says surface materials is lava. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit further in my details menu here to where it says surface properties. And what you can do is you can actually pan how it appears across our brush, or we can rotate it, or we can flip it. The one in particular I'm looking for is scale. So I want to make the lava appear larger across the whole brush. So I'm going to scale it to make sure it is both the same in U and V. You might remember, of course, U and V is how we refer to the positioning of materials on top of our brush or whatever object we're putting it on. So I'm going to want them to both go up at the exact same time. So I'm going to click on the lock button here. Now when I tell it to magnify it, I can just say 2 times, which is probably good enough for our purposes. So it's going to be U 2.0, V 2.0. So it's just making it twice as big as before. And then I click Apply. Now my lava field, it's not so obviously being repeated. And certainly not so obvious as when we come through rather quickly during gameplay purposes. People aren't going to be staring that closely at the lava. So these allow you to actually change how you can actually magnify it. I could even crank it all the way up to 8. And you can now really see the details of the flames on the lava. That's probably too big for my purposes. So I figure either 2 or 4 is good enough for actually magnifying how the lava appears here. All right, so those are the first things that I wanted to do. To actually get into today's topics, game over events and Launchpad events, we're going to start exploring how we can change the actions of particular objects in the world by using Unreal's blueprints. Now, Unreal's blueprints is the method of computer programming that Unreal uses. So instead of having to learn C++, which is what Unreal is based off of, we can instead use Unreal Blueprints, which should make it a little bit easier for us to actually figure out. It is a visual-based system, and similar to how we created the materials last week, the lava materials. So you see little squares, and then you can pull cords off of them or wires and connect them to other nodes as we go along. So first things first, let's do the Launchpad. So I put in this Launchpad here. It was a box brush last week, just to remind myself that I was going to be putting that Launchpad there. I don't actually need the box brush here though for now, so instead I'm actually just going to delete this. I'll press the delete key. And I'm going to leave this here at least, so once I come out of my editing mode, I'll be able to remember, yes, this is where I want my Launchpad. So to create a new Blueprint class, you're going to go down to your content browser at the bottom of your screen. Open up the Add New menu. Let me get my face out of the way here. Open up the Add New menu, and then at the top of the Add New menu is a Blueprint class. So you remember last week we were creating a new material. This time we're creating a new Blueprint class. When you click on that, it then asks you what kind of blueprint you want to create. Now there's many different kinds of blueprints. The most simple blueprint that we're going to be making, and that people would use most often when they're doing game design, is the actor. So an actor, as they say, is an object that can be placed or spawned in the world. But more specifically, of course, it is an object that you can act upon in the world. It will act upon you, the player. It might act upon other objects in the game world as well. Now, some of these other ones, for example, is the pawn, meaning this is something that you can control or be possessed by the player and receive input from the controller. And then there is the character, which is a specialized pawn, meaning that it has all sorts of extra functions added to it, such as jump functions and the like. So you might remember from back in our first week, we were messing around with the third-person character and changing how high he could jump. That's what the character is for. So a pawn is something you can control. A character is a kind of pawn that has jump controls, animation controls, so on and so on, so we can actually have our little Unreal robot. But that's far more complicated than today, and I'm not going to go into any of these other ones because they definitely get much more complicated than what we need to cover today. Today, we're just going to use the actor. We click on actor. It's going to ask for a name. Our name for this will be Launchpad. Press enter. And now we're going to double click on our new Launchpad blueprint. Now when we come to the Launchpad blueprint, it's going to have this big dot in the middle of the screen. This is symbolizing the center of our blueprint. So for the object that we're going to make into our Launchpad, this will be the actual center of the Launchpad. This dot doesn't actually exist in the game. It's just here to remind you where the middle of everything is. Now, one thing to keep in mind, sometimes people have kind of gotten into this trap here. If I open up a blueprint and I haven't done anything to it yet, and I want to change my mind. So let's say I've changed my mind and I've opened up, this is an empty blueprint, and I click X, and I've left it now. If I go back into the blueprint, Unreal is going to take a look at this and say, well, hey, this isn't a new blueprint. And it seems to be an empty blueprint. So I'm not going to show you the full blueprint editor. I'm just going to show you some of the extra information you can put into it to change it. So I've had a lot of people get stuck in this before where they come to their blueprint editor and it doesn't seem to be showing the full blueprint editor. Just keep an eye right here for the Open Full Blueprint Editor link right on the top here and click on that. And it will take us back to our full blueprint editor. Then right up here along the top, you'll see that there are 3 tabs: the viewport, construction script, and the event graph. So we're going back to the viewport. Now we're back at where we were to begin with anyways. So this is how we're going to create our blueprint. We're not going to leave it as an empty blueprint, of course. We want to make sure that it actually has something in it. This is going to be our Launchpad. So to create our Launchpad at this point, we will add a new static mesh. So a static mesh is an object that sits in the world. It's not like the brushes because you can't resize it or anything, but it can be any particular shape that you want to add, whatever your artists have given you, or even just simple shapes. And luckily, Unreal has given us a lot of very simple shapes. So we're going to go into the upper corner here where it says Components. Drop down the green button that says Add Component. We're going to be adding a static mesh. Now be careful you don't select skeletal mesh. That is how we would create a new character or a new animation such as our robot. So we want to use a static mesh. We click on static mesh. And it's going to want us to give it a name immediately, so we can call it our pad, P-A-D. Okay, so this new static mesh is called our pad. Right now there still is no static mesh there though. This is just the holder place for the static mesh. So now we look over on the right side of our screen. Look down about halfway through the details here, where it says static mesh. And you see that it says static mesh is none. So for my Launchpad, I like to use the 1M cube chamfer. So a chamfer is basically just a rounded cube. I like this because it actually has kind of a mattress look to it. So it's nice because it doesn't really have that many details. I can actually squish this without worrying about my material getting squished out, so that's what I'm going to do. Now that I've added the chamfer here, I'm going to change the scale, the Z scale, up on my transform here to 0.2. And now it looks kind of like a mattress. Maybe I'll make it look a little longer too, so 1.1 in the Y range. Yeah, a little bit like a mattress perhaps. 1.2, yeah, good enough. Okay, so now I've got this chamfer in here, and looking down to my materials, I can change the material to something else too. Again, as I mentioned last week, when you're using a lot of your gameplay elements, particularly something that has a particular action, making sure the player knows that they can use it and something special will happen is very important. So having my bright red color, quite different from the concrete that I've been using, is probably good for this. So that way when the player comes up to it, they can say, oh, this appears to be something. What happens if I touch it? So this is going to be bright red to let us know that this is my Launchpad. All right, so now that we have this static mesh in here, we want to actually have it do something now. And that's where the event graph comes in handy. Now, in the event graph, it has a bunch of pre-made events here, such as begin play, meaning when the game starts playing, are we going to do something? There's also event actor begin overlap, meaning that if something actually bumps into us or runs over us, something might happen. I could use that for the Launchpad. And then there's the event tick. So the tick is actually referring to how often a new frame is drawn per second. So every single time a frame is drawn in the game, so 30 frames per second or sometimes even 60 frames per second, it counts it as a tick. So you could have 30 to 60 times every second this event tick will happen. This kind of could be kind of handy if you want to have some kind of a constant thing happening throughout your game, or maybe a constant check to make sure something's going on. What I think we're going to use though is making sure that, going back to the viewport, making sure that we've selected the pad. We're looking over here in our components menu on the left hand side that we have our pad selected. You can scroll down to the bottom of the details menu here, and it has a bunch of different events that we can use. Whether or not it's been clicked, such as you click it with a mouse, whether or not you have another object overlapping it, so it says begin overlap here, or end overlap, meaning that we're not overlapping it anymore. I've often found that on component hit usually works pretty well in this instance, so I'm going to click the plus button next to that. It's going to take me back to the event graph, and now it says on component hit, and then in parenthesis pad. So meaning that if the pad has been hit by something, then it's going to trigger this event. So to check to make sure that what is hitting it is our character, we need to draw a string off of our other actor here and let go of it. And it's going to say, what kind of action do you want to do with the other actor? So when it's referring to an other actor, it just means who's hitting us. In this case, we want it to be our character who's hitting us. So we need to check to make sure that it is the character hitting us. So to do that, we are going to use what it is often called in computer programming, casting. So when you cast a particular variable in computer programming, you are trying to make sure it is only used as that particular variable. Or in this case, we are checking to see if whatever the other actor is actually our character. So when we let go of this, it's going to ask us what our action is we want to take. We're going to type in cast to third person. So since we are searching for it, you don't have to use spaces. You can just type in cast to th, and you'll eventually see it. There's two options here. There's the third person character and the third person game mode. Now the game mode controls how the game is played over the entire level, and sometimes might be useful, but in this case, we want to actually see if it's the character itself, the Unreal robot that we've been playing with. So we'll click on that. You'll see now that our onComponent hit is now attached to our third-person character. Both on top here, this white triangle shaped is connecting it over here. This is the execution cable, I guess you could call it. The execution line here, meaning do this next. So it's going to execute this next. And then the cast to third person character is going to try and find out an object. What's the object? It's going to be the other actor. So now it's checking to see if it is the third person character. If it doesn't work, let's say if I have a bunch of bouncy balls in my level and they happen to hit my Launchpad, it's going to say that the cast failed because they're not actually the third person character. And so I can actually have it do something else if I wanted to, if something other than my third person character catches it. But otherwise, I'm going to want to use the top one here, saying if it actually is the third person character, then I'm going to want to do something as the third person character. So for now, I'm just going to ignore cast failed. I'm going to pull off a string here where it says as the third person character, what's going to happen to the third person character? So I drag my string off of that. Let go. And now it's asking me what kind of actions do I want to do with the third person character. Now one thing that's kind of handy about Unreal Blueprints is that there's this little checkbox here that says context sensitive, meaning it's checking to see what kind of actions apply to the third person character only here. So this is kind of handy because otherwise the list of possible actions that I can do in a blueprint are often quite huge, and even this is still very huge. But in particular, I want to see whatever actions only apply to a character. So remember earlier I was mentioning how a character is a specialized kind of pawn that has extra functions added to it. In this case, one of the extra functions that I want is a function called launch. So I'm going to do a search for launch, Launch. And you're going to see that the only one that's available here is launch character. Now keep in mind, this is not going to work with other actors. If I have bouncy balls in my level, if I have other things that are going through my level, and they hit my Launchpad, because they're not a character, it's not going to allow them past this cast here. So they're not going to be cast correctly. And if for some reason I forgot to include the cast and I just said launch the character without the cast, it's going to throw a whole lot of error messages because it's going to say this isn't a character. You can only launch a character. You cannot launch anything else. So this is why I'm using cast to third person character, so I can make sure that it is only a character that is going into my launch character function here. So this is all practically done at this point. So upon the pad getting hit, we then will check to make sure it's a third person character, and then we're going to launch the third person character. Now I can actually tell it how I'm going to launch the third-person character. Right now, the launch velocity is set to 0, 0, and 0 on the X, Y, and Z axis. So, of course, a true launch pad launches you way up in the air, far higher than you could jump. So you might remember back in our first day, we were talking about how the jump height normally is 600. So 600 being 600 centimeters. Mind you, that is the jump velocity before gravity starts grabbing you and pulling you back down again. So if we want to get them a good launch to get across that lava, we need to have it a lot more than 600. I think that usually 2,000 works well on this. I don't know. With a lot of game design, of course, you have to do a lot of testing. So for now, at least, I'm going to say we want him to go 2,000 centimeters launched into the air. So, of course, the z-axis means straight up in the air. I can also say launch him forward along the x-axis, or launch him along the y-axis, which would be from side to side. But I think for the most part, I want to make sure that my Unreal Robot's momentum, just from running, should be enough to propel him forward. I don't know. I won't really find out until I test this. The next two options are whether or not I want to override the z-axis or override the xy axis. So, again, if I'm running into this, I want to make sure that my momentum from running forward goes forward. So I don't need to override the xy. His momentum will continue forward. However, with the Z override, I want to make sure that even if I'm falling down and landing on the launch pad, I'm still launched into the air at 2,000. Because otherwise, if my momentum is going down and through my launch pad, then without the Z override, as soon as I hit it, I might actually end up losing all my momentum and then I'm not launched at all. So let's find out, see if this works. To make sure this works, first thing we have to do is to make sure that the Blueprints editor is okay with what we've done. So to make sure that the Blueprints editor is okay with what we've done and that there's no errors, such as me putting in something that's not a third-person character in here, I'm going to go up here right above my Blueprint event graph, and there's this button that says compile with a question mark next to it. The question mark means it hasn't had a chance to check yet. It means that it's dirty and needs to be recompiled. So it's going to check to make sure that this is okay. Is it okay? Yes. Gives me a check mark afterwards. Great. So I'm going to save this and go back to my world by clicking the X in the upper right-hand corner. Now I see that we're about halfway through the class here, so I just wanted to say hello again. My name is Doug Tepe. If you're just joining us, today we're adding some gameplay elements to our game. Right now, we have just finished creating a Launchpad. We're going to drag it into the world. So again, my name is Doug Tepe. This is the Tinkering Create 4th class on digital game design. All right, so my Launchpad here now is listed down in the content browser. You can see there's a little picture of it showing it there. I can click and drag it into the world. Now, right now, it seems awfully small. But because I used a material that doesn't have much details on it, it is quite smooth and red, again, I can actually resize this without having to worry about my material getting ruined. Let's make this wider. There we go. Got to make sure it's obvious that I can launch off of it. Okay, let's test it now. I'm going to press the play button. Oops, wrong button. Here we are. Press the play button. Now we're going to run down here. Going to skip my over platform for now until I come up to my launch pad. Stay over on the left-hand side so I don't bonk my head, and bounce! Yeah, that's huge. Okay, so maybe 2,000 was too high. Okay, that was too much fun though. Let me do it one more time. Bounce! Oh, I bonked my head. Oh dear. Yeah. Okay, so it definitely is bouncing correctly. 2,000 probably is too high. So here, let me go back, drag this over a little bit more so that way people don't mistakenly bonk their head. I'm going to open up the Launchpad again. And so we'll change this down. 2,000 is too high. Let's make it, I don't know, 1,400. Okay. So 1,400, again, you have to compile and save after you make these sorts of changes. click the X. And maybe just for the sake of testing, what if I go down to my player start here and drag it all the way up to where my Launchpad is? That way I don't have to go so far back. Here we are. Now my player starts closer to the Launchpad. Still pretty high in the air, but I clear the lava. Now again, though, remember, we are relying on the Z momentum of my character. If I just come up and just tap this, or actually even if I walk onto it, it doesn't even count it as a hit. And then my momentum is actually not enough to get over. So it's still kind of relying on the player to make sure that they hit it with the right amount of speed to totally clear the lava. That actually is perfect. Maybe I'm going to leave it at 1400 because that way, even while I'm still holding down the W key the whole time, I'm able to make it pretty much right to the other end. So I think that works pretty well. Now, of course, you might have noticed, whoops, I'm falling off the edge of the world. There it all goes. Now, you might have noticed, of course, if I just kind of walk into it, it doesn't actually count it as a hit event. So the hit only actually occurs once the character comes at it fast enough. Now, this might be a problem from gameplay, but this is a running style game. So I think that for the most part, this would not be a problem. I'm going to make sure later that people are only running when they're in the game and not just walking. So that way, it always creates the hit event. Alternatively, of course, we could instead use the event on begin overlap, So that way, if we actually overlap this, then it doesn't matter if it's a hit or not. If we overlap it, if we enter into its zone, it's going to launch us anyways. And that's a guaranteed way to make sure that it will always trigger, even if we're not actually hitting it. But, this is good enough for now. Okay, I'm having way too much fun with this. So, we have got about 22 minutes left here. I'm going to show you now how to create a simple game over event. So we got all this lava in here, but right now nothing's happening with the lava. So if I go over here to the lava and I walk on it, nothing happens. There's no actual game over event right now happening because of this. So we want to make sure that the game is over and you're forced to have to start the level over again. So to do that, what we can do is we could take our brush here and turn it into a mesh, because, again, we can't really use a brush for our blueprints. You have to use a static mesh at that point for your blueprint. So because this is a big, long brush, I could convert it into a mesh, but I'm still not 100% sure exactly how this is going to come out in terms of gameplay. Remember, we're using the brushes here just to actually come up with our actual gameplay design. As far as the artistry and the like, we'll add that in later, particularly once we get an artist to help us out, or maybe if we found some other assets that we want to use that might be freely available on the Unreal Marketplace or in other places, so we can add more artwork later. But right now, we're really just trying to think about the actual game design. What is it that's fun about the game? What are the obstacles going to be? Where are they going to be? So the lava is probably going to change at a later point. I don't want to make my lava a blueprint. Instead, I'm going to use a separate blueprint that I can just lay on top of the lava, that if you just happen to pass over it, and you happen to go inside it, in this case this would be our begin overlap situation, then it triggers the game over event. And this can be kind of handy for other purposes too. You can have it surrounding other dangerous objects perhaps, and if, for example, you get too close to that dangerous object, whatever it may be, then it triggers the game over event too. So this could be used in a variety of different ways. So same way as before, by creating our Launchpad, we're going to go down to our Add New, lower left-hand corner. We're going to add a new blueprint class again. And again, we need to pick what kind of blueprint we're going to make. It's going to be an actor. It's going to want us to name the actor. We're going to call it a game over. Now, one thing you might remember back from the first class too, I mentioned about how computer programmers use a style of writing called camelback, where we use a capital letter for each new word. So in the case of my Launchpad and my game over, I said capital G, capital O for game over, and capital L and capital P for Launchpad. Unreal will actually recognize these as separate words. So this is a very handy way to name your objects, name your actors, so you can find them again later, and then Unreal can reference them at some later point as well. So now we have Game Over created. We're going to double click on this again. We are back at our viewport. Now in this case, we do not need any particular mesh for our Game Over event. This is actually going to be a Game Over zone, if you will. So to create a zone, which would just be hidden in the game world, we're going to go up to our add component. And we want to search for a box. In this case, it is a box collision. Now there's a couple other collisions as well. If you type in collision, you'll see that there's the box collision, the capsule collision, and the sphere collision. So these are just referring to whether or not something will bump into something else, a collision event. So I'm just going to use the box collision. And it creates a nice little box here. Now looking over here on the details side, you're going to see that the actual size of the box is only set to 32 by 32 by 32. That's awfully small, but that's actually okay for now. We're going to stretch it out later and spread it through our world on top of the lava. So for the time being, it's probably fine just to leave it small at 32 by 32 by 32. Remember, everything is measured in centimeters, so 32 centimeters would be maybe that? Yeah. Not very large at all. So looking again at this, we got our box that's 32 by 32 by 32. It is represented by a wireframe. So it's just letting us know that it doesn't actually exist in the world. It's just here for our benefit. Now we look down in our details menu, drag down to the bottom of our details menu. And the second option here in our events is on component begin overlap. So that's what we want. As soon as we start to overlap this collision, this box collision area, we want something to happen. Now, of course, I could use on end overlap, meaning that I've left the zone. I don't think that's really necessary. I'll just say on begin overlap. So we've entered the zone. So it takes us over to the event graph again, and it says on component begin overlap, and in parenthesis it says box. So of course we're referring to the component of our box collision. So it's the same thing as before. We want to know what the other actor is that has entered into our box. So we're going to drag off of other actor here. And the same thing as before, we want to make sure that this is our third-person character. Now, of course, if you're making some other game other than a third-person character, such as a first-person game, or a game that might use a pawn or something, you have to refer to that particular pawn or that other character inside here. So you'll say cast to, and then you'll type in its name. So in the case of our third-person character here that we're using the third-person template, it already gave us a third-person character called third-person character. But it might give it a different name depending on which template you use. Or if you even wanted to create your own character, you're going to have to remember what the name was because you're going to be referring to it again here. So again, I'm just going to use my third-person character here. I'm casting it to it. Now this part is particularly important for a game over event. If again you have some other actors in your game world, falling balls or something like that, something to trip up the character, which would be kind of funny and hilarious, but if one of them happens to enter into the game over zone, you might end up causing the game to end before the character has even done anything, which would be very frustrating. So again, we want to make sure that it is only our third-person character that can cause a game over event. If they enter the game over zone, then we're going to have the game over event. So same thing as before, we say as the third-person character, what are we going to do? And what we are going to do is... I think first things first, let's just actually start the level over. We're going to make this a little bit more complicated later. We'll put in words and the like, add a delay, perhaps sound effects or something like that. But just to make it a simple game over event, we just need to reload the level again, force the character to go back to the beginning. So to do that, we're just going to type in open. Oh, you know what? I'm making a mistake here. So actually, I don't need to do this as the third-person character. So you might remember when I pulled off of the cord off the third-person character, and I mentioned how it says context sensitive, all the different things that I can do to a character are listed here. But opening a new level is actually not one of them because that doesn't really have anything to do with the character. It has to do with the level. So actually, I don't need to use as the third-person character here. Instead, I'm just going to pull off of the top execution node here, let go, and now when I type in open, I see that open level is one of the options. Now here, it's going to ask me which level do I want to open. Right now it says none. So this is where it's kind of important that you remember what name you used before. It does not give you a drop-down menu here. So you have to remember what name you used before. Now, of course, I'm pretty sure I called mine level 1, but I just want to double check. So I can just go right up here, click the minimize button, go back to my content browser, take a look here. There it is, level 1. Now, as you can see, this could be used to open a new level too. We could even create a game over zone that's at the end of the level that says, you know, congratulations, you made the end of level 1. Now let's go on to level 2. But instead, we want a game over that forces you to go over and start over again because you touched the lava. So I see here that it's called level 1. To go back, I can just go down to the bottom of my windows here, and I'll see that my minimized window is down there. Brings it back up again. My open level node here, I'm going to click on level and the number 1. Enter. So that's it. Not actually using the third-person character here because we're not actually doing anything with the third-person character. We might do something later, perhaps, have the third-person character blow up or some sort of fun special effect. But for the time being, at least, we just want to open a new level. So we're saying, when we overlap the box as a third-person character, we're going to open a new level. If it's not the third-person character, it does something else, and maybe we can do that later. But for now, I'm just going to ignore that. Click on Compile. It says there's no problems with my code here. Great. I'm going to click on Save. And then I click the X button to go back out to my world again. Now that I'm back out on the world, I can place my game over on top of the lava. Now, one advantage here is that I did make sure that the lava was not quite touching the floor. There actually is a layer here that I could stick it in. That's below my floor, so I don't actually have the game coming to an end before you go through. But if you go through the floor, then we can trigger the game over event. So let's drag in our game over box here. Right now it's a very small box. So I'm just going to go up to my scale objects here and expand this until it fills up the whole space. I'm probably going to want it to be at least as wide as my lava in case some clever person thinks that they can try and jump around my lava. I'm still going to make it do a game over event here. And just keep on dragging my mouse until this fills up the whole level. This might be a good time to actually go and view it from the left side here and have a look at the whole world. I'm using my mouse scroll wheel to just roll it back till I see the whole thing. So, you know, I could just grab this and have it fill up the whole world. That way, no matter where the lava is, it's always going to be covering up the whole world. Now, of course, too, I can zoom in close here and make sure that my lava is just below the concrete level, but above the actual lava. These lines are very fine, so I'm finding myself kind of squinting at this, trying to see where my concrete ends and where the lava begins, but it looks like I have it properly above the lava, but below the concrete. So, let's test this out. We've got my holes back here. There are the holes back here. Let me take the player's start position, drag it back to the beginning of the level again, and let's click play. All right, so we're running down here. We're going to step into the... Whoa, look at that. That was super fast. But as you can see, it starts the whole game over again. If I happen to fall into the lava, game over, start over again. Same thing if I come over here to this lava over here. If I come down this corridor, land on this, start over again. If I go backwards, start over again. So, of course, people who love to hack the game will probably discover you can completely jump over that. But don't worry, we'll put in ways to block people from messing with the game. Of course, sometimes it is fun to stick in little Easter eggs for people to discover ways that they can break the game. Maybe find something hidden somewhere else at least. For now at least though, the main functionality, the main part of my gameplay is, if you hit the lava in any of these places, it starts over again. It starts over pretty quickly. So I think what we're going to do next week is we will decorate the world a little more. We'll add a few more gameplay elements. And then after we're done doing that, we're going to see if we can actually add in a game over message. Here's right across the screen. It says, game over, you have to start over again. Give it a 2-second delay. We don't want the delay to be too long because then people will get frustrated every time they have to start over again. But a 2-second delay is long enough to see the message saying, you lose, or something like that, and then start over again. So just to do a quick start on that, let me just show you how we can add that delay in. So down in our content browser again, I'm going to double click on Game Over. And in between open level and third person character, I'm going to add a delay. I can do that by actually grabbing off of the execution node here, pulling it back, and then typing in delay. No, I think I did that wrong. Go forward, delay. Yeah, there we are. So it works the opposite way as when we're in the materials editor. If you drag a node in between two nodes and you start from the previous node, it will just automatically attach it in between the two of them. So again, now that I have my third person character on my level here, I'm going to just drag off of the third person character, type in delay, and press enter. You can see that it's automatically under flow control here is delay. So if I just press enter, it'll choose that one, or it might choose one of these other delays if I click on it with the mouse, but I just want delay. How long is the delay? Well, right now it's set for 2 seconds. Oh, 0.2 seconds. Let's make it, no, not 20 seconds. Here we are. Let's just make it 2 for now. And then it will open the level again. Let's click compile, save, click X to go back out again. We're going to press the play button to test it. Now, as soon as I touch it, counts 2 seconds, starts it over again. Now, of course, the other problem is that it's still actually letting me control the game. So I'm going to have to turn off the controller at that point to stop the character. Turn off the controller, and then maybe we can even add in an explosion or something to show that the robot blew up. But as you can see, there still is a 2-second delay. I touch the lava, 1, 2, starts over again. Okay, so we are nearing the end of this class here. So I just wanted to show some more things about decorating our level and make this a little bit more fun. I'll do that for the remainder of the class here. So taking it back into the perspective mode. Oops, you know what I just noticed? My lava has actually got this big open spot over on the right-hand side here. Not my lava, my game over zone. Looking over here at my world outliner, I see that my game over zone is not quite centered, so let's bring it to the center. There we go. Now it's in the center. I can make it precisely in the center by changing the Y location down here in the details to 0. Now it's precisely in the center. Great. All right, so for a little more decoration, you can import all sorts of different meshes and different artwork into your level. And for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more of some of the decorations that occur automatically with the starter content. So going down to our content browser here again, in the starter content folder, we're going to double click on that. And there's a bunch of different things that we can choose from here. I explored a little bit before of some of the props. So in the props, for example, I could add, let's say, a rock. And mind you, this rock actually uses the same basalt texture that we used for our lava, so that might actually be kind of handy for the lava field. Actually, maybe sink it inside the lava field. And then the same thing as before, even if we stretch this out, its material is not terribly noticeably different when you stretch it. I'm going to lie it on its side a little bit here. Drag it over to the side. This could even create a possibility for jumping over the lava at some later point, actually. Maybe you have to jump from rock to rock or something. But if we want to make it look like different rocks every single time, we can actually just keep on dragging in the rock in a different location. Maybe have less of it actually observable from the lava. Now, one handy thing that I've noticed before in a lot of the big AAA games is that sometimes they'll actually use this to their advantage. So instead of actually having to have many, many different kinds of rock styles to create like a face or something like that, they might actually just repeat the same rock face several times in a row. They're only using the same mesh each time, but it still has the appearance of being a separate material. So if I press Alt-click and drag this apart 3 times, it's pretty obviously a copy. But then if I overlap them a little bit, change their size perhaps, pull them inside each other, it's not so obviously the same mesh anymore. And now it almost has the appearance of being a totally different mesh now. So now I've got the appearance of what looks like a totally new mesh just by overlapping the rock mesh. This saves the amount of time it takes to load in a game. And it also helps control things like how much memory is going to be required for the game. And particularly, of course, if you're designing games for a Nintendo or PlayStation alike, those big professional game console companies have very strict requirements about how you make your game. So you want to make sure that you keep control as to how many extra things you put into your games. Now, of course, by today's standards, the games are so incredibly complex that even the very latest games that have come out, including the very latest Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy VII Remake, I guess they call it, has a lot of extra details. So the latest PlayStation is capable of an awful lot. But still, it's always good to be aware of these things, how you can make sure that you can copy these things and not necessarily overwhelm the computer. So I've got some nice rocks here. I'm going to take these rocks, join them all together into a group by pressing Control-G. Now they all move together, because I don't really want them on top of my concrete. I want them in my lava. Rotate the whole thing till it's flat. Sink it down into the lava. Yeah, some cool looking rocks. Also in the starter content are the particle effects. We got all sorts of cool particle effects here, such as fire or explosions. And we'll explore how to make particles a little bit more detail at a later point. But basically what a particle is that it just takes a single texture and repeats it several times over, oftentimes 100 times over, to create an effect of something rising up or blowing up or what have you. So there's the fire one here, which I think might be handy for lava. Let's go back here so we can symbolize right from the very beginning of the game that this lava is dangerous. I can click and drag in the fire effect here. And when I start playing the game, we should see the lava. There it is. It's now looking kind of hot and flamey. You even see smoke rising off of it. Very cool. Now, for some reason, when I first drag it into the world, it is on its side. As you can see, the main arrow for it is pointing in the side direction. So we're going to need to rotate it until it's pointing up. That way our fire is actually looking proper when we come up to it. Here we go. So now we got a nice fire effect, a little bit of smoke rising. Pretty cool. The only other thing I want to point out in the remaining time we have here is the blueprints in the starter content. These are actual blueprints, they are actors, and so they're actually a combination of sound effects with the particle effects. So for example, we can include the fire here. So you're going to see now that it actually has what appears to be a picture of a speaker on it with a little checkbox. Now when we approach it and we come up, we'll hear a nice crackling sound on it. So it's combining both the sound effect of the fire and the fire particle. Pretty cool stuff. So feel free to explore this yourself in the meantime. Next week we are going to see if we can add some more functions to our game over event. We're going to add the game over message. We're going to add some special effects for how we blow up, and we're going to expand it a little bit more, add some more gameplay elements. We're going to make the level go a little bit longer, or perhaps maybe even add a few twists and turns. And of course, most importantly, because it is a running style game, we want to make sure that the character is running all the time and never stopping. You don't have a chance to just stop and have a look around. Where's the challenge in that? I want to make sure that the character is forced to actually have to dodge things. So we're going to make it so that our runner will keep on running continuously. So my name, again, is Doug Tepe. This is the Tinker and Create class on digital game design using Unreal Engine. I hope you guys had a good time this week, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week.